She had grown up in a world where obedience was everything. Her life had been carefully guided by people who taught her how to follow orders without question. Never had the chance to dream for herself or make her own choices. Every step she took was monitored and directed. Her heart had learned to obey, but not to feel freely. The mission she received that morning was like every other task that came before it. Was precise and cold. She had to enter the life of a man who was successful, but unaware of the dangers surrounding him. Her job was to manipulate and ruin what he had built so that the people who had sent her could benefit from his downfall. She read the instructions again and again and memorized every detail, every weakness. She was told he had every habit and routine was written down for her to use against him. There was no room for error. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made had to be calculated to gain his trust. Without revealing her true purpose, she dressed carefully that day, choosing clothes that were simple and non-threatening, yet appealing enough to catch his attention. She knew she had to seem natural and effortless. Her makeup was minimal and her smile practiced, but not forced. When she stepped out into the city, she felt a strange mix of nerves and certainty. She had done this before countless times, but somehow this mission felt different. The man she was sent to destroy was not like others. She had seen his photograph and read reports, but nothing could prepare her for the way he carried himself. The first meeting was accidental on purpose. She was at a coffee shop when she noticed him sitting alone reading a newspaper. He looked ordinary at first glance, but there was a calm strength about him, something that made people feel safe around him. She waited until he looked up, then brushed past his table, pretending to bump into him. She apologized softly and quickly moved on, but she felt his gaze follow her. Her heart beat a little faster, not because of attraction, but because something in him felt different, something she could not yet name. She left the coffee shop and walked the streets. Trying to calm herself, she reminded herself of the mission, of the importance of her duty, yet she could not stop thinking about the moment he looked at her. His eyes were not just observing, they were seeing, and that unsettled her in a way she had never experienced before. She had spent years learning to hide emotions, to blend in, to be unnoticed until she was needed for destruction, but his presence made her feel noticed in a way that was unfamiliar and unsettling. She spent the next days learning more about him, subtly observing without revealing herself. She learned where he worked, the people he interacted with, and the routines that filled his day. She practiced her smile and the way she would approach him. She was careful to remain casual and natural. She could not afford mistakes. She met him again at a park where he often took his lunch. He was sitting alone on a bench, enjoying the sunlight and reading a book. She approached slowly as if by chance. She asked a question about the book, and he looked up at her with a polite smile. He answered kindly, and they exchanged a few words about the weather and the book. She noticed how he listened attentively, how he responded thoughtfully. She had been trained to manipulate people to find weaknesses, but she found herself observing strengths instead. The ease with which he spoke, the gentleness in his voice, made her question her own role in the mission. She spent the rest of the day replaying the interaction in her mind. She reminded herself that this was part of the plan, that she was not here to befriend him, she was here to destroy him. That she could not shake the feeling that she wanted to know more about him. Her superiors had given her clear instructions. There was no room for personal feelings. But something inside her resisted obedience in a new way. She started imagining conversations beyond the planned interactions. She wondered what his life was like outside the routine she had been told about. The more she observed, the more she realized he was a man who cared for people, who worked hard and tried to make a difference in small ways. She saw him help a street vendor pick up spilled fruit, the way he smiled at children passing by, and the respect he showed to waiters and colleagues. She noticed how he did not take advantage of people and how he seemed to find joy in simple things. These were qualities that were not listed in any report, but she could see them clearly, and they began to affect her. Her plan was to get close enough to exploit his weaknesses, yet she found herself wanting to protect him from imagined threats. She started questioning the morality of her orders and the organization she had followed blindly for years. She wondered if she could even complete the mission without feeling guilt that would haunt her. She visited the coffee shop and park frequently, pretending to read or wait. She learned his habits, his favorite spots, and small routines that made him comfortable. She listened to his conversations from a distance, learning about his concerns, In joy, she began to understand him not as a target but as a human being with fears, dreams, and a heart that deserved care. She started keeping a journal of her observations, not for her superiors but for herself. She wrote down moments that touched her, like the way he helped a lost child find his mother, or the way he laughed at a joke from a passerby. She had never allowed herself to notice such details in the past, and it changed her perspective slowly and profoundly. One afternoon they met. By chance at a bookstore, she asked for advice on a book, and he offered suggestions politely. She lingered to hear his opinions and found herself genuinely enjoying the conversation. The ease between them felt natural and unforced. Friendliness many times before, but this felt different. It was real. She felt a warmth she could not name. Her mind struggled with the duality of her mission and her feelings. She knew she should be manipulating him, calculating his weaknesses, yet she found herself protecting her emotions from the mission instead. She walked away from the bookstore feeling conflicted. The orders in her mind clashed with the growing desire to know him without deceit. She realized that her mission was no longer simple, and she could not tell where duty ended and personal feeling began. She felt a strange sense of fear, excitement, and hope all at once. She was beginning to care for a man she had been sent to destroy, and the realization terrified her, but also gave her a sense of life she had never experienced before. The days that followed were filled with careful planning on her part and unexpected moments of genuine connection. She observed him closely, learning from him without harming him. She started leaving small notes of kindness, anonymously noticing how he responded to thoughtful gestures. She had been trained to exploit weaknesses, yet now she was learning to nurture strengths. She felt a new sense of purpose, even as she knew danger was close. The mission had become more complex, because her heart was no longer obedient. The man she was sent to destroy had unknowingly become someone she admired, someone she wanted to protect and understand. Her steps were cautious yet filled with a new determination. She would continue to follow orders on the surface, but secretly she would find ways to be near him, to understand him, and to protect him. She felt that she was walking on a thin line between loyalty and morality, between duty and the stirrings of love. She did not know what the future would hold or if she could ever fully defy her superiors, but she knew one thing: she could not harm him. The mission was no longer about destruction. It was about learning what it meant to care for someone beyond herself. She realized that for the first time in her life, she had a choice, and it terrified her and thrilled her at the same time. She went home that evening and sat quietly looking at the city lights. She thought about the man she had met and the unexpected emotions that had awakened within her. She knew that her life and his life were now entwined in ways she could not predict, and the story that was supposed to end in ruin was already beginning to change in ways that neither of them could yet understand. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a small hope that maybe the future would not be dictated by orders alone, but by the choices she would make and the heart that had started to awaken in her. She had begun to see him not just as a target, but as a person with a life filled with small joys and quiet struggles. Each time she watched him interact with others, she noticed little things: the way he helped people without expecting anything in return, the way he listened carefully when someone spoke, and the way he carried himself with calm confidence. She spent hours thinking about how to approach him the next time, without arousing suspicion, but also without following the plan too closely. Her superiors expected her to find his weaknesses to exploit them, but she could not bring herself to do so. The more she learned about him, the more she wanted to protect him instead of harm him. She started frequenting the places he often visited, pretending to be casual or passing by. Her actions were deliberate, yet she tried to make them seem accidental. She learned his habits, his favorite spots, and the people he interacted with. She observed how he treated his colleagues and friends, and she saw kindness in him that made her feel ashamed of her mission. She realized that she had never seen anyone treat others with such patience and respect. She remembered her own life, the orders she had followed, the people she had manipulated, and the things she had done without question. She felt a strange weight of guilt, but also a sense of awakening. She began to wonder if she could change, if she could step away from the world that had trained her to be obedient and cruel. She began conversations with him gradually, at first asking small questions. or seeking advice on trivial matters. Each interaction was carefully measured so as not to reveal her true purpose. But each one also left her feeling more connected to him, she learned. About his dreams, the quiet ambitions he kept to himself, the little things that made him happy. She saw his struggles with challenges at work and the way he tried to handle them with dignity. She began to admire him not as a target, but as a person who deserved care and respect. Each day she spent with him in small moments made her question the mission more and more. She had been trained to separate feelings from duty, but now feelings were impossible to ignore. She started noticing how he made her feel calm and alive in ways she had never experienced. She laughed at small jokes with him and found herself wanting to share her thoughts and opinions. She discovered that being near him was no longer about following orders, but about wanting to be near someone who made her heart feel something real. She still reported back to her superiors, but the words felt hollow. She described his routines and habits, but avoided mentioning the things she had learned about his character. She was walking a fine line between obedience and her own emerging conscience. She knew that one wrong step could expose her and ruin both of their lives, yet she could not stop herself from feeling empathy. She saw the world through a new lens. Through his eyes, she realized that people could be good, and that her life did not have to be dictated by orders. She started to imagine a different future, a life where she could choose her own path and care for someone without being forced. Her inner conflict grew stronger as the days passed. She wanted to follow her heart, but she feared the consequences of disobedience. She practiced restraint while secretly finding ways to spend time with him. She helped him in subtle ways without making it obvious. She would leave small notes or perform little gestures of kindness. She noticed how he responded to such moments even when he did not know who was behind them. She felt satisfaction in protecting him and making his days slightly easier. She became more confident in her ability to act independently. She realized that she did not have to follow orders blindly. She could make choices that mattered not just to her superiors, but to her own conscience. Each decision gave her a small sense of freedom that she had never known before. One day, she overheard a conversation that revealed that her superiors were planning something bigger, something that could harm him. Seriously, she felt panic rising in her chest, but also a determination she had never felt before. She knew she had to act carefully. She could not reveal herself too soon, yet she could not allow harm to come to him. She began planning ways to subtly protect him while maintaining her cover. She started thinking strategically, using her training for good rather than for destruction. She felt a strange sense of empowerment and fear at the same time. She realized that she was no longer a passive instrument of others, but a person capable of making choices that mattered. She continued to meet him under the guise of chance or casual interaction. She asked questions about his day and listened carefully. She offered help in small ways and noticed how he gradually began to trust her. She felt the warmth of connection and the slow growth of trust forming between them. She started to feel emotions she had never allowed herself to experience: love, care, and concern that were real and undeniable. She was learning that human connection could be more powerful than any mission or order. She also began to notice how he responded to her presence, not just with politeness, but with genuine interest. She saw the way he looked at her when she spoke, the way he remembered small details about her conversations, and the way he seemed to relax around her. She felt a mixture of relief and longing each time she saw him. She realized that being near him was no longer a chore or a mission. It was a choice she wanted to make. She wanted to continue to see him, to protect him, to understand him. Each day that passed made it harder to think about completing her mission in the way her superiors expected. She found herself imagining a future where she could be honest with him and protect him openly. She knew that such thoughts were dangerous and could put both of them at risk, yet she could not stop thinking about them. She began to take small risks to be near him. She would linger a little longer in conversation or offer assistance in ways that were not required. She felt the thrill of stepping beyond the constraints of her training. She also felt fear of being discovered and the consequences that would follow. Yet the fear was mixed with a sense of purpose, a knowledge that she was doing what she believed was right. She began to understand that her feelings and choices mattered more than blind obedience. She started to see herself as a person who could protect and care rather than destroy. She was learning the value of human life and connection in a way she had never known before. She continued to observe him not as a target, but as a man with dreams, hopes, and struggles. She noticed the small victories he achieved and the quiet courage he displayed. She celebrated his successes in her heart. Even as she kept her distance, she began to feel pride in being someone who could make a difference in his life without his knowledge. She was becoming a silent guardian, someone who could use her skills for good. She realized that the line between duty and morality was shifting. She was no longer sure what her superiors expected would matter. She was more concerned with what she knew to be right and how she could protect him. She began to act with intention, with a sense of responsibility. She found herself thinking about his well-being constantly and planning ways to keep him safe, even if it meant risking her own position. She began to write notes in her journal, not just about observations, but about her own feelings. She explored the emotions she had kept hidden, her fears, her hopes, her growing admiration and care for him. She realized that acknowledging her own humanity was the first step toward change. She felt a sense of awakening as she understood that she could choose her path. She could decide to act with compassion rather than obedience. She could protect rather than harm. She could care rather than manipulate. She knew that the mission she had been given was no longer the mission she wanted to complete. She wanted something more, something real and human. She wanted to be near him, to see him thrive, to share in his small joys, to protect him from the dangers she had once been trained to bring. She understood that her life had been controlled for so long, and now, for the first time, she had the power to make choices that could change not only her life but also his. She felt a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. She knew the coming days would be challenging, and that she could not reveal her feelings or intentions openly. Yet she also knew that she could no longer follow orders blindly. She had begun to fight for something that mattered to her own heart. She wanted to be a force of good in his life, someone who could care and protect. She realized that this was the beginning of a journey that could change everything for both of them, and that the path ahead would test her courage, intelligence, and heart in ways she could not yet imagine. Her life had started to change in ways she could not have predicted. She had begun her mission with a clear purpose and a rigid plan, but now every step she took was filled with hesitation and thought. She wanted to protect him, yet she had to maintain her cover. Her feelings were growing stronger with every interaction, and she found herself thinking about him constantly. She remembered the small moments that had seemed ordinary at the time. The way he laughed at simple jokes, the way he helped strangers without a second thought, the way he listened patiently to anyone who spoke to him. These were not details to exploit. They were details that made her feel alive and human. She began to question everything she had been trained to believe. The world she had known was filled with rules, obedience, and manipulation. Her life had always been about following orders and suppressing emotions. She had been taught that feelings were weaknesses that could be used against her or others, yet now she felt emotions she could not ignore, feelings that demanded attention and action. She started to understand that caring for someone was not weakness, but strength. She wanted to be near him, not to deceive or destroy, but to protect and support. She started planning ways to help him secretly, to make his life easier without revealing her true intentions. She watched as he struggled with small challenges at work and in life. She observed how he tried to manage everything on his own, how he took responsibility without complaint, and how he treated those around him with respect. She felt admiration and a deep sense of responsibility. She could not allow harm to come to him, even if it meant defying her superiors. She began to imagine conversations with him that had not happened, conversations filled with honesty and trust. She imagined sharing her own thoughts and feelings with him, something she had never done with anyone else. She felt a desire to connect in a real way, not a manipulated way. This longing made her realize how lonely her life had been and how much she had been missing by following orders blindly. She started taking small risks. She would linger longer in his presence, ask more questions, and offer small gestures of kindness. She felt the thrill of independence, the sense that she could choose her own actions rather than being a pawn in someone else's plan. She continued to observe him carefully. She learned about his routines and habits, But now, she used this knowledge to protect him. She intervened subtly in situations where he might face minor difficulties. She felt satisfaction in using her skills for good rather than harm. She realized that her life could have meaning beyond obedience. She also noticed changes in herself. She was becoming more confident and courageous. She felt capable of making decisions that mattered. She felt a growing sense of morality and empathy. She wanted to be a force for good in his life and in the lives of others. She started to plan for the moment she might have to reveal her true intentions. She knew that it would be dangerous and that there would be consequences. Yet she felt that honesty and protection were worth the risk. She began to understand that love and care required courage and selflessness. She wanted to be brave enough to act according to her heart. She started to anticipate the moments they would meet each day. She felt excitement and nervousness when she thought about seeing him. She cared about his well-being in ways that went beyond mission objectives. She felt a strong emotional bond forming. She started to reflect on her past life, the years spent following orders. Without question, the people she had manipulated and the things she had done. She felt regret and sorrow, but also a determination to change. She realized that she could not undo the past, but she could shape her future. She could choose to be someone who protects and cares rather than harms and manipulates. She continued to learn more about him. Each day she discovered his hopes, his dreams, and the little things that brought him happiness. She learned about the challenges he faced and the way he handled them with quiet dignity. She felt admiration and a desire to support him. She wanted to be someone he could trust and rely on. She also began to feel the beginnings of a deeper connection, the kind that went beyond friendship or duty. She felt emotions that were confusing and intense. She realized that she was beginning to care for him in a way that was real and personal, not forced or calculated. She knew that acting on these feelings would be dangerous, but she could not ignore them. She started to think about ways to protect him from the plans that her superiors had set in motion. She knew that there were threats he was unaware of, and that if she did not act, he could be seriously harmed. She began to plan carefully. She had to maintain her cover, yet act in ways that ensured his safety. She felt a sense of empowerment and responsibility. She realized that she could use her skills to influence outcomes positively rather than negatively. She also felt fear. She knew that any mistake could reveal her and put both of them at risk, yet the fear was mixed with a sense of purpose, a determination to do what was right. She continued to spend time with him. She engaged in conversations about books, work, and small daily matters. She listened attentively. She asked thoughtful questions. She offered help in ways that seemed natural. She wanted to be near him without revealing her true purpose. She wanted to understand him and be part of his life in a meaningful way. She began to imagine a future where she could be honest with him and openly care for him. She realized that such a future would be dangerous and uncertain, yet she felt that it was worth striving for. She continued to reflect on her own life, her training, and her choices. She realized that she could no longer be a passive instrument of others. She had to act according to her own conscience. She had to choose a path that aligned with her new understanding of morality and human connection. She started to feel a growing sense of courage and independence. She knew that the coming days would be challenging. She would have to navigate threats and maintain her cover, yet she also knew that she had a responsibility to protect him. She felt a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. She understood that her mission had changed. It was no longer about destruction. It was about protection, care, and the possibility of love. She realized that she could be a person who made a positive difference in his life, and in her own she felt the awakening of emotions. She had never experienced a sense of purpose. It was uniquely her own, and a desire to act with courage and integrity. She knew that the path ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. Yet she was ready to face it. She had begun to see that life could be about connection and empathy rather than blind obedience. She wanted to continue this journey to see what could grow between them. She wanted to be someone protected, cared, and eventually could be trusted. She felt that. For the first time in her life, she had a choice, and that choice was to act according to her heart and conscience. She knew that the coming days would require careful planning, courage, and honesty, yet she also felt hope that this new path could lead to something real and meaningful for both of them. She continued to prepare herself for the challenges ahead, determined to protect him while learning what it truly meant to care for someone beyond herself. She could feel the tension growing inside her every day. The closer she became to him, the harder it was to maintain her cover. She had been trained to manipulate and deceive, yet now she wanted nothing more than to protect him. She knew that any mistake could reveal her and put them both in danger. She began to act more carefully, studying each situation before moving. She observed his interactions with others, the way he treated people with respect and kindness, the way he tried to solve problems without causing harm. She admired these qualities more and more, and felt a deep desire to be someone who could support and protect him. She knew that her superiors were planning something against him, and the knowledge weighed heavily on her. She could not stand by and let harm come to him, yet she also could not act recklessly. She started to make careful plans to intervene subtly. She used her skills in observation and strategy to anticipate problems and prevent them from affecting him. She felt a growing sense of purpose and empowerment. She had always been an instrument of others. Now she was acting on her own conscience. She had begun to understand the meaning of courage and responsibility. She began to spend more time with him in small ways, offering help, advice, and listening attentively. She asked questions about his day and shared thoughts about trivial matters. She wanted to be near him without revealing her true purpose, and slowly the bond between them grew. She noticed the small moments where he showed care for her without knowing it, the way he listened, the way he acknowledged her presence, the way he smiled when she shared her opinions. These were not large gestures, but they were enough to strengthen her feelings and to make her heart feel a connection she had never experienced before. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear, knowing that any misstep could ruin everything, yet also knowing that her presence could bring him comfort and protection. She began to feel more confident in her ability to navigate both her mission and her own emotions. She started to find ways to protect him from the dangers that were approaching. She intervened subtly, using her skills to deflect problems before they could reach him. She watched from a distance and acted carefully. She made decisions that were risky yet necessary. She realized that her training could be used for good rather than harm. She felt satisfaction and a growing sense of identity. She was no longer just a follower of orders. She was a protector, someone who could make a real difference. She also began to notice changes in herself. She felt emotions she had long suppressed: love, care, and concern for another human being. She realized that these feelings made her stronger and more determined. She began to see the world through a new lens, a world where human connection mattered more than obedience. She started to consider a future where she could act according to her own choices. In morals, she imagined being honest and open with him and protecting him without deception. She knew this would be dangerous, but she felt a strong desire to pursue this path. She started to anticipate each interaction with him. She felt nervous, yet excited. She wanted to learn more about him, to understand his thoughts and feelings. She found herself thinking about ways to make his life easier without revealing her own presence. She took small actions each day that could help him. She left anonymous notes, performed small gestures, and observed how he responded. She felt satisfaction in helping someone without expectation of reward. She began to see the impact of her actions and the importance of care. She realized that she could choose to be a force of good in his life. She also began to reflect on her past life, the obedience, the manipulation, the years spent following orders without question. She felt sorrow for the things she had done, yet also determination to change. She understood that her choices now could define her future and the life of the man she was protecting. She started to feel a stronger bond each time they met. She listened to him talk about work dreams and small daily moments. She shared insights and observations in ways that felt natural. She noticed that he began to trust her more. He began to rely on her advice and valued her perspective. She felt joy in being able to support him. She felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never experienced before. She also began to feel a deep emotional connection, a bond that went beyond friendship or simple interaction. She realized that she was beginning to care for him deeply and wanted to act on that care. She knew that revealing her feelings or intentions could be risky, but she felt that protecting him and being honest were worth the risk. She began to plan carefully for the moment when she might have to confront her own superiors and make a decisive choice. She knew that the mission could no longer be completed in the way it was originally intended, she had to act according to her conscience. She wanted to protect him at all costs. She began to feel empowered and courageous. She realized that her skills could be used to safeguard rather than destroy. She started to act with intention and purpose using her knowledge to prevent harm. She felt satisfaction in using her abilities for good. She also began to reflect on her own life and choices. She realized that she had the power to shape her own path, and that obedience was no longer the only option. She wanted to be someone who cared and protected, someone who made a difference. She started to feel hope. She imagined a future where she could be honest with him and build a connection. Based on trust, she knew that it would be difficult and risky, yet she felt a strong desire to pursue it. She began to embrace her emotions. She realized that love and care were not weaknesses, but strength. She felt determination and purpose. Continued to spend time with him, observing his routines, supporting him in small ways, and gradually building trust. She knew that any step could be dangerous, yet she felt a growing sense of courage and resolve. She started to feel that her life could be about more than orders, obedience, and manipulation. She began to see the value of human connection and empathy. She wanted to be someone who could protect, support, and care for him, and eventually be trusted. She realized that the mission had changed. It was no longer about destruction. It was about protection, care, and the possibility of love. She knew that the coming days would test her courage, intelligence, and heart, yet she also knew that she was ready to face the challenges. She felt a sense of awakening, a new understanding of morality, responsibility, and human connection. She began to understand that her choices could define the future, and that acting according to her heart and conscience was the path she wanted to follow. She felt hope, courage, and determination. She knew that protecting him and building trust were worth every risk. She embraced the journey ahead, knowing that it would require careful planning, bravery, and honesty. Yet she also felt excitement at the possibility of building something real, meaningful, and lasting with him. She had reached a point where every decision mattered. Her feelings for him had grown stronger, and she knew she could no longer hide the truth of her actions or intentions. She had spent so long following orders and suppressing emotions that it was difficult to imagine being open and honest. Yet she understood that protecting him and being truthful were more important than fear. She began to carefully plan how she could reveal herself and ensure that he would be safe. She thought about the threats that had been set in motion, the dangers that were still close, and how she could act to neutralize them. She relied on her training, but now it was guided by empathy and a desire to protect rather than harm. She observed his daily routines, his interactions, and his small struggles. She found ways to subtly help him without revealing herself. She intervened quietly when she could prevent mistakes or difficulties. She felt a sense of fulfillment in being able to act according to her conscience and to protect someone she cared about deeply. She also reflected on how much she had changed. She realized that the obedience and manipulation of her past life had been a shield and a cage. She had lived without real feelings or connections. She understood now that choosing to care and act morally required courage and strength. She knew that her life had shifted. She wanted to be honest and supportive, and to build trust and a meaningful connection with him. She planned carefully for the day she would confront her own superiors. She knew that defying them would have consequences, yet she felt that protecting him and choosing her own path were worth the risk. She imagined telling him the truth about everything and being able to stand by his side openly. She wanted him to know that she had cared for him all along, and that her intentions had shifted from mission to heart. She continued to spend time with him. She engaged in conversations, shared small moments, and listened attentively. She learned about his hopes, fears, and the challenges he faced. She admired the way he handled difficulties and the quiet courage he displayed. She felt gratitude and affection for being allowed to witness his life and character. She began to feel a sense of partnership even before any words were spoken. She had learned to anticipate his needs and to support him without his knowledge. She felt satisfaction in using her skills for good and a growing sense of responsibility and purpose. She also began to notice how he responded to her presence. He trusted her. He relied on her advice and subtly sought her opinions. She felt the warmth of connection and a quiet joy in being able to influence his life positively. She reflected on how her own perspective had shifted. She had once believed that obedience was everything. Now she realized that choice, empathy, and courage were more important. She understood the value of human connection and the importance of acting morally. Even when it was risky, she continued to plan her next steps. She considered every possible outcome and prepared herself for the challenges she might face. She knew that revealing the truth could be dangerous, yet she felt confident in her ability to protect both herself and him. She began to feel ready to take the risk she had been preparing for. She knew that honesty and protection were more valuable than fear or obedience. She continued to spend time with him. Every meeting, every interaction, strengthened her feelings and reinforced her desire to act correctly. She wanted to ensure that he was safe and that he would understand her actions and motivations. She imagined the moment they could be honest with each other. She hoped that trust and care could survive the revelation of her true role. She felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, and determination. She understood that she was no longer following orders. She was following her own heart and conscience. She began to take more decisive actions to safeguard him. She anticipated threats and took measures to prevent them from affecting him. She felt satisfaction in acting according to her conscience and using her skills for protection rather than harm. She also felt a growing sense of courage. She had learned that her emotions and feelings were not weaknesses, but sources of strength. She understood now that caring for someone required bravery and selflessness. She continued to observe and support him. She offered help when needed and listened with attention and care. She began to feel that her presence made the difference, that she could positively influence his life and contribute to his well-being. She felt fulfillment in knowing that her actions mattered. She also began to think about a future beyond the mission. She imagined a life where she could be honest and open with him. She imagined building trust and a connection based on mutual respect, care, and understanding. She realized that such a life would require courage and careful planning, yet she felt ready to take on the challenge. She continued to prepare herself. She considered all possible risks and how to manage them. She felt determined to protect him, to act according to her conscience. She knew that honesty would be necessary, yet she also knew that it would have to be done carefully. She spent time reflecting on her own life. The obedience, the suppression of feelings, the actions taken for orders. She realized that she had changed profoundly. She had learned to value human connection, to act morally, and to care deeply. She felt a sense of awakening and growth. She knew that her life could have meaning beyond following orders. She continued to interact with him. She asked questions, listened attentively, and shared small insights. She noticed his trust growing. He began to rely on her. He sought her opinions. He valued her presence. She felt joy in a deep sense of connection. She realized that she had begun to influence his life positively. She felt satisfaction and a growing sense of responsibility. She began to act more boldly, using her skills to protect him. She anticipated problems and solved them quietly. She felt empowered and capable. She also continued to reflect on her emotions, her care, and her growing love. She realized that these feelings gave her courage and purpose. She felt a growing determination to act according to her heart and conscience. She knew that the mission had changed. It was no longer about destruction. It was about protection, care, and the possibility of love. She felt a mixture of hope, courage, and anticipation. She prepared for the moment she would be able to reveal herself and her intentions. She wanted him to understand her care and protection. She wanted to stand by his side openly. She felt ready to face any challenges that might come. She had learned the value of choice, empathy, and courage. She had discovered the strength in caring and protecting. She had grown into a person who could act with integrity and heart. She continued to plan and prepare for the coming days. She remained vigilant and thoughtful. She wanted to ensure that he was safe and that trust could survive the truth. She imagined the moment when honesty and protection would converge, when she could be open and they could build something real. She felt a deep sense of purpose and readiness. She knew that the path ahead would test her, yet she also felt excitement and hope. She had chosen to act according to her Heart, she had chosen to protect, care, and be honest. She had chosen a life guided by empathy, courage, and love. She understood that her decisions could define the future for both of them, and she was ready to embrace it. She felt a mixture of fear, anticipation, courage, and hope. She had discovered that she could shape her life beyond obedience and orders. She had learned to value connection and empathy. She had become someone who could protect, care, and love, and she was ready to take the final steps to ensure that he would be safe and that they could share a life built on trust, understanding, and genuine connection. She faced the future with determination and an open heart, knowing that she had chosen her path and was ready to follow it wherever it might lead.